All right, we've got another one of my old friends here on Subject Matter Expert today. I've known retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Faint for over 15 years at this point. First and foremost, he's a dear friend. But more relevant to this show, he's a former Infantry and Military Intelligence officer with 27 years of service and 7 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, with units including the 5th Special Forces Group, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and the Joint Special Operations Command. He's taught at West Point, served as the chair for the study of special operations and managing editor at the Modern War Institute, and holds graduate degrees, including a master's in international relations from Yale University. He co-authored Violence of Action, The Untold Stories of the 75th Ranger Regiment in the War on Terror with me. And he's also the owner of the Havok Journal and executive director of the Second Mission Foundation. With all that being said, I'd like to remind the audience that anytime I have an intelligence professional on the show, we've had a few of them at this point, we'll be steering clear of anything that might compromise current or future operations or endanger the lives of Americans or our allies in the field. No amount of views or clicks are worth a single American life, in my opinion. Charlie, welcome to Subject Matter Expert.
Thanks, Marty. It's great to be back in the studio with you, and I'm thrilled to be on the SME podcast.
Oh, man, I'm so excited to get into this. I mentioned your 27-year career and said that you were both an infantry and an MI officer. I think for the military folks listening, it's relevant to point out you were branch detailed to infantry. Is that correct?
That's correct.
For your first couple of years?
That's absolutely right. So, Marty, I came in through the Reserve Officer Training Corps program, ROTC, at Mercer University. And I knew I wanted to do infantry, but I knew also that I probably didn't want to do that my whole career. My father had been a military intelligence officer, and he'd been Special Forces before it was his own branch. So I knew I wanted to probably do some intel stuff, do some soft, so branch detailing was the best way to go. And frankly, I mean, you know my history academically. It took me a long time to get my act together. So I think the only reason I got either intel or infantry was because I asked for both. The way that it typically works is the highest performing infantry people only want to do infantry, same on intel. And that leaves some room for people like me that want to come in and do something a little bit different. So yeah, I was infantry for 4 years, switched over to intel and did another 23 afterwards.
Yeah, and I bring that up to say vast majority of your career was spent in intelligence. A significant portion of that in a deployed environment, doing really great work at a very high level. One thing that you and I have talked about a lot in the past, and we're going to just jump right into the niche topics right off the bat here, but one of my favorite things to talk about is, the F3 EAD, or people call it the feed targeting methodology. And just to break that down real quick for people, there's the way the United States and our allies often will find the bad guys, or did for a long period in the War on Terror, was through this feed targeting methodology. And it stands for find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and disseminate. Charlie was a big part of those early days with that targeting methodology and refining it. And I'm kind of wondering, what were those early days like when you were implementing that? And when did you know that it was something that was going to work for the long term?
Yeah, I was hoping you bring that up, Marty. As you know, that's one of my big things that I've been super excited about for many, many years. So F3 EAD, the targeting process, a lot of people ascribe that as the soft targeting process. Now, doctrinally, we have a different one for the general purpose forces, but F3 EAD can be applied by anybody. And I was not an originator of that. I didn't have anything to do with it. The task force was already doing it by the time I got there, but I had a hand in helping publicize it. When I was in JSOC, I was getting ready to move on, go to grad school and come teach at West Point. And I partnered with a friend of mine named Mike Harris. And Mike, like you, Marty, was in the Ranger Regiment, and then he went off to Special Forces, and I met him in JSOC. And I was like, hey, man, this F3 EAD thing really works well. We should write an article about it. So we did, publicized it. It's been huge. It's really interesting to me when I go into Google Scholar every once in a while, and I see how many times it's been cited. I regularly get people from the field reaching out to me about it. I had a couple of reporters that wanted to do insider scoops on the task force that had read my article about it and wanted to talk about soft targeting. I turned them down, but it's been interesting to see how that works out. And it's just a cycle, a virtuous cycle of the true partnership between intel and operations in a way that most organizations weren't doing and frankly still aren't doing. I think it's highly successful. Anybody could do it. and they should check out every piece they can on F3EAD.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it was a big part of my experience in the Ranger Regiment and being deployed overseas. When it comes to concepts like that are, it's always talked about, right? Like, does Intel drive ops or does ops drive Intel, right? And with that F3 cycle, it really is this sort of life cycle thing. There's not a beginning or an end to it. And that exploit, analyze, disseminate being such a huge key piece there. A lot of the times those things that we'd find on target would be come back, hand them over to people that worked for you.
Yep.
And then that would result in more follow-on targets. Was there any tipping point in there in your deployments where you saw just it move from a dink and dunk sort of targeting to like, wow, we've got a pretty well-oiled machine at this point of this thing running?
I think the evolution of F3EAD is a story of the evolution of SOF. So as you know, and you mentioned earlier, my toe in the door of SOF was being a support guy in the 5th Special Forces Group. So 5th Group was very good to me. I commanded the MI detachment in the support company there, got my first deployment there. They were very, very good to me. But what was interesting, my first tour in Iraq in 2004, we were in Balad, we were standing that up. And we had the Siege of Sodef, which was the Special Forces Task Force that was there. And then we had the National Mission Force Task Force. And we literally shared, there was a wall between our two compounds. And I remember trying to go over there to do very basic officer task of adjacent unit coordination. Hey, I'm next door to you. Let's talk about it. They wouldn't let me on the compound. And I remember being resentful about that and not understanding. I mean, I understood later because I was in the task force, but I was like, what do you mean you won't let me in? Well, here, I mean, I'm over here with this, I'm the support company commander for 5th Special Forces Group. Hey, maybe we could partner, we could help you guys. And their attitude was like, there's nothing you could do that would help us because we're the task force and you're not. And I came back later. I did a couple more tours in Afghanistan with the 160th, came back to Iraq when I was with the task force. And there was a literal hole in the wall that we could drive back and forth to. So partnership had started to increase. And then my last tour with the task force, when I was there, we were sharing a JSOC. So there was still compartmented information that needed to be protected, and I understand that. But we got better and more collaborative, and that's what F3EAD did. And you mentioned the D piece, the disseminate. There was a lot of controversy about that, and you'll still see it represented at F3EA because people will say the D is understood. It's not understood. You got to make every element a direct, deliberate process, or stuff gets forgotten about. If you don't disseminate that information, then you're only doing 80% of the process. That dissemination, what you mentioned, Marty, is what drives those subsequent targets. So your task force would go out, hit the bad guy, bring him back and all his little friends and all their stuff. And then that period of darkness, or at the latest, the next period of darkness, you're back out based on the stuff that we've exploited and disseminated and gotten that information out. So those two things happen parallel. And also, not to go off on a tangent, but it's kind of the story of the evolution of the Ranger Regiment. Because because you were in that unit, that at the early stages of the GWAT, you guys were doing a lot of outer cordon. And then by the end of it, you were running the whole task force. So those three things kind of happened all together. And it was because it worked. F3AD worked, soft collaboration worked, Ranger Regiment worked. And I think that's the biggest driver of all three of those things.
Yeah, I think people that think that disseminate is a sort of a given are people who've had the luxury of, I would imagine, the luxury of coming in after that was established.
Yeah.
They don't realize what things were like pre 9/11 or pre 2004, 2005, where you've got a guy like General McChrystal who comes in, has not just once, demands interagency, cross-departmental communication. He was famously responsible for, I think, doing these sync meetings where you'd have 50, 100 people in there. I'm sure you were probably a part of some of those. And that just never really happened before. You wouldn't necessarily know what the SEALs were doing, what the Rangers were doing. Never mind what people in what we generically call OGA or other government agencies were up to, that all were impacting the same battle spaces. Sometimes those target sets were overlapping and would impact a lot of different people. And if you had no idea what was going on, I mean, for example, I just recently had Eric Stebner on the podcast. He was my first platoon sergeant, but he was more notably one of the guys on Takur Ghar during the battle for Roberts Ridge. And, when I talked to him about, like, did you know much going into it? Not really. I mean, they were vaguely aware of Operation Anaconda going on, but didn't really have much to do with it. They didn't really know, that AFO team that went up there, they weren't really read in on that. And they just kind of were told to put your shit on and we're going. And I don't think they even really knew all the details until they were already en route. Later in the war, stuff like that was common where you weren't getting your specific grid coordinates or something until you were already halfway to the objective, but you were doing these time sensitive targets where just the machine was moving so fast at this point. This was different. And I thought that really illustrated how much things had changed where, for example, if you were on QRF even 5 years later, you were getting fully briefed up on what was going on that night so you could be ready for whatever it is you may need to respond to in these worst, QRF doesn't go out unless something bad happened, and all of that just alludes to, I think that the disseminate was not a given. It was not a guarantee. It wasn't happening. And it's something that I could easily see, when we think about some of the lessons learned of the GWAT, and sometimes, in between wars, lessons get lost, right? Like, how much did I know about patrolling in the jungle compared to Vietnam guys, right? Some of that institutional knowledge gets lost along the way, some of those finer TTPs and things like that, where people just assume it's a given and they're going to drop it off. That'll be a lesson that needs to get relearned at some point in the future, if that were the case. I'm not saying it is, but it's a really important one. When you look back on 7 deployments with special operations units, what's the single most important habit from the intel community that consistently moved the needle on target?
Yeah, there were so many things. I think picking one, because that was the prompt there, taking a systems approach to intel support. And by that, I mean, we got to be collaborative, innovative, and data-driven. And if we do those things, if we're innovating on the intel side, I'm thinking when Palantir got fielded and what a game changer that was for us, using F3 EAD, breaking down those institutional barriers. Collaborate, innovate, and be driven by the data, not by our biases. I think that's the best thing we can do. Parallel to that, this is for all the enablers who ever want to be in any type of special operations. Guys, be good at your job. Don't be good at their job. Marty's an infantryman in the Ranger Regiment. I'm supporting that guy. I'm not trying to be an infantryman in the Ranger Regiment. And when I was in 5th Group, I saw that a lot too. We had a lot of intel guys that wanted to do Green Beret type things when they were in my unit wearing a red hat. So I saw when I got to JSOC and the 160th, certainly, how it could be if intel and support guys are valued, they're specially selected and trained, and they do their job in support of the mission and started trying to go out on the mission. So if we as intel take a systems approach to intel support and as enablers, if we focus on our jobs, not the guys we're supporting jobs, I think that's a recipe for sustained success.
And the reverse is true, right? Like if you're a shooter, if you're an operator, you're on the assault team, you're good at a lot of different things. You're not necessarily good at what your augmentees are there to do,
Right.
Take an example of, like, you might know how to do explosive breaching and things like that. You're not an EOD tech. You might know how to do some battlefield interrogation. You're not a professionally trained interrogator like a 35 Mike in the Army is, right? Like there's, know where your augmentees come in and how to use them, how your attachments are going to be a value add to the mission. And I think that's something when I look at JSOC, that's another place that was kind of pioneered, where attachments weren't necessarily seen in augmentees. They really built the system of a robust augmentee system, right? And that because they're like, hey, we're a more lethal organization, a more successful organization if we get subject matter experts in here and build out our intel capacity and all these other things, right? And I think that's lost. And when we talk about that, this is a super niche military conversation here, but this applies to corporate America, right? Where you've got supporting functions and things like that. You may see your sales force or your marketing team as the shooters or the assault team, right? Like the people that are going out there and generating revenue for the company. It's different at every company. Sometimes it's sales, sometimes it's marketing, but you want to make sure that you understand how to integrate and implement the HR folks, the accounting folks, the legal folks, in some of my past roles, the legal department I reached out to all the time because it kept me out of hot water or showed me, hey, do this or this for the best results, and to be as efficient as possible. And so those lessons learned in the special operations environment, they apply over to a lot of other areas, and it's something that I think people that are leaders in corporate America or even small businesses, they can take lessons from that.
Marty, I could not agree more. In retirement, as you know, one of the things I do is I do some leadership consulting work with an organization called Thayer Leaders here in West Point. And what they teach and what I believe for years, and you just said, is the overlap between the way .mil leads and .biz leads. They're almost, if there have been diagrams, they'd almost be circles on top of each other. Because leadership is leadership. The character of it stays the same, whether you're leading on the battlefield or in the boardroom. The consequences are different, but if you consider like life or death of a corporation, depends on your decision making, it's very similar. And when we look at things like the Army's principles of mission command and things like commander's intent and stuff like that, 1/3, 2/3 planning, all this works. All this works for anybody. Leadership's a trainable skill. And if people are smart, they do what the task force does. They look at what other people are doing, seeing how that works, and then apply it to yourself. So yeah, I could not agree more with that, Marty. They're very similar between the two.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into some leadership things. You're a guy that retired as a lieutenant colonel. You've led at many different levels and continue to lead on the civilian side now. So I definitely want to get into more of that as we go. But going back to sort of like the intel operations and supporting special operations, can you kind of walk us through the time between collection and a target getting executed? What do great teams do in minutes or hours on the intel side that average teams took all day to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Marty. I think we need to back up a little bit to when I first joined the Army in 1995. So commissioned on Mercer University. I was there at Fort Campbell, 1st 327 Infantry, getting ready to make my transition over to Intel. So I started paying more attention to what the guys in the S2 shop at our battalion were doing. And at the time, frankly, the answer is not a lot, Marty, not a lot. We didn't even have Google Earth back then. So you're not getting real-time imagery. The intel person at a battalion is typically a captain, and often that's a captain on the first S2 type gig. So they have very little experience, probably haven't been to that duty station before, whereas the battalion XO and commander have 10, 15 or more years of experience, may have been at that duty station before. They're better, frankly, at doing intel work than that new captain. So because of that, the captains, the intel shop largely got relegated to doing armsman checks and handing out maps. Because we had no assets, the only real intel assets you had at the battalion level back then was the scout platoon, which doesn't belong to the intel guy. That's a special platoon that the battalion commander controls. So we couldn't do anything. The best we could do is template, which is guessing. I guess this is where the enemy is going to be around the HLZ. I have no way of proving or disproving that. Maybe the scouts can go try to figure it out. So you couldn't do a whole lot. And who's going to be better at guessing? The guy who's been in the Army for 3 or 4 years, or the guy who's been in the Army 15, 16? So back in that day, we couldn't do a lot. Now we fast forward to what we're doing now. The assets available down to the squad level are clutch. You've even got UAVs out there that a squad leader can control. So in answer to your question about turning collection to execution, it's not instantaneous because you still got to process, and there's a limit to what our brains can do, but it's almost happening in real time. And we saw that when we were overseas, especially when units of the task force are going out on the objective, they're hitting targets straight from that target they just hit. All right, guys, get back in the truck. We have a next target. From a variety of means that they had at their ability, they can go on to that next target. because of persistent ISR, intel surveillance and reconnaissance overhead, that they could be vectored. It's like, oh, that's not where you need to be. Go to this other place. So this stuff is happening in real time. And while the information is coming back, if it's digital data that they could send back, or if they bring it back to the compound, a bag of goodies, it could be exploited within that next period of darkness. And the next night they're back at it again. And that was what the task force had such good success doing under General McChrystal, later Admiral McRaven, and I'm sure continuing to this day. It's just getting in the middle of that network and ripping apart from both seams, treating it more like a starfish type organization, where if you cut off the arms of starfish, throw it back in the water, it's going to grow back in a bunch more of them. And treating it like a starfish organization instead of a spider organization, think if you just cut the head off, it's all going to die. Mm-hmm. It's not going to do that. So being able to turn that so quickly and getting the operators, ops types back out on the target that day, or at the latest, the next period of darkness, has been huge. And sustaining operations faster than the enemy can sustain really gave special operations a lot of success.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Again, it just goes back to that speed with which people worked. And I find it fascinating, because it really would be where we'd get back at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, hand stuff off again to folks that probably worked for you, especially our time periods overlap. In my case, they probably literally worked for you. And the fact by, 3, 4 o'clock the next day, when we're waking up, grabbing something from the chow hall, getting ready for like, hey, what's on deck tonight? And it's stuff that was worked on through the day by intel folks. And you think about a lot of this, just to describe the complexity of that. None of this is in English. This is a variety of media types. It's a variety of people that you're pulling off, from very low level folks to very senior leaders and things like that. This is a lot of information to synthesize. And the fact that was happening so quickly, day in and day out, is really incredible. And I guess that leads me to my next thing. You were in for 27 years. You've seen all the evolutions. How's the role of intel professionals that are attached or assigned to special operations units? How have those roles changed over the years? How have commanders gotten better at using them than those 95 S2 days?
100%. One of the reasons F3AD worked, the only reason it worked, is because commanders thought intel was important. Commanders control everything that happens in a unit. If they didn't think intel was important, like they didn't in the 90s, with good reason, because we couldn't do a whole lot for them, then we could F3AD as much as we wanted, but we would never get anywhere. So commanders that understand intel and have high expectations of intel do great things for their organization, especially in special operations. So you'll remember now General Retired Kurilla. Mm-hmm. As the commander of the Ranger Regiment. So he was the commander of the task force my last tour when I was there running the exploitation facility for the task force. So I worked for him through about three different levels, three levels up, but I had regular engagements with him. And that guy really understood and valued intel. In fact, the first thing that he would have his subordinate task force commanders brief every night was exploitation, which is an intel function. Mm-hmm. And because the commander thought it was important, then the subordinate commanders thinks it's important. And now everyone's beating a path to my door to get all of the information they can so they could satisfy the commander's intent on this. It was great. And within the exploitation facility, the only time in my whole career, Marty, where I had complete hiring and firing authority. I could drop somebody for any reason, or frequently did, because the consequences were so high. And everybody that came to the task force who thought they were going to come to my facility, and that was a whole bunch of intel people, because they knew that's where the action was for intel types. They all had to interview with myself and with my senior enlisted advisor, and sometimes we wouldn't take them. Mm-hmm. Because the consequences were that good. And because we were able to get results night after night, and because exploitation was the center of gravity for the task force, according to General McChrystal and Admiral McRaven, everybody thought it was important. And because we were held to account if we didn't deliver, then that virtuous cycle again between ops and intel kept going, and that train just kept running and doing great things for the country.
Did you notice that more folks Probably, I guess, because of their exposure to how important Intel was through the War on Terror. Did you notice more people switching over from an 11 or 18 series or some of these other series to go into Intel jobs?
I don't know. I don't think I ever noticed that. The thing I noticed the most, Marty, was that the guys in those operations jobs started thinking that we were more important and valuable, and paying more attention to us. When I tried out for the 160th, fifth group was the needs of the Army gig. That we talked about this before. You go to, as an enabler, you go to 10th Mountain just as easily as you can go to 10th Special Forces Group. So I got into fifth group because I was at the advanced course, had already been a company commander, already been to Korea, which back in the day, those were the two things you typically did after the advanced course. And my branch manager came down. She said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "Oh, fifth group at Fort Campbell sounds sexy." So that's how I got there. Whereas for the 160, I had to try out. Certainly for JSOC, it's super competitive to get in at all levels. So when you have that type of setup, then the ops guys value and expect more out of Intel. I think most people are pretty happy doing their jobs in the military. There's not a whole lot of jumping back and forth. In fact, I'm trying to think of the folks that I saw that came to the unit who were either 11, 18 series, 13 series, one of those combat arms types. I think that the majority of them, I can't think of anyone actually that came to us who wasn't hurt in some way.
So it was more of a forced transition. When you did see it, it was, hey, you're probably not, which is interesting because I think one of the other ways that the roles have changed is I think Intel enablers were going out on target with the assault force a lot more than they ever had in the past. Is that true?
Yeah, because they trusted them. And when I was in the 160th, the pilots were always asking me to go out on mission. They were inviting me. I mean, obviously they didn't need me. What am I going to do? I'm 6'5", I weigh 280. What am I going to do on a helicopter? But I recognized that was an honor to be invited. And I also didn't want them to think that I was scared. So I went on enough missions with them. Everyone knows the S2 for the task force isn't scared to go out on missions, but I can't do my job for the mission if I'm on the mission. So yeah, I got invited out. A lot of Intel types did. Now there are a lot of Intel enablers who have skills that are very helpful on the objective. Guys who do data exploitation, guys who speak the language, who are fluent in it, guys who can do battlefield interrogation better than some of the people on the task force. That means the shooters can do shooter tasks, enablers can do enabler tasks, and it tends to work pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's the way it usually worked out, and that's why I think the reputation of Intel guys changed a little bit, and I even see that in further evolutions by you look at the Ranger Regiment stood up, I guess it was probably 7-8 years ago now, the Ranger Military Intelligence Battalion, and that is that came to fruition after I was in Ranger Regiment. I'm not super read in on everything that they do. I've just been told by people I trust that they do some pretty cool stuff. And that it just shows the importance of Intel and what you can do in that career field is really changed over the years. It's not, I think a lot of people, if you go back to Cold War days, I think a lot of people would have thought like, if you're not in the CIA or something like that, Intel jobs aren't actually that cool. Right? Like that was probably the pervasive sort of view. And you might have occasionally gotten that young 18-year-old enlisted kid that signed up as an Intel analyst thinking that he was going to go be Jason Bourne. I'm sure you probably commanded a few like that. And then they show up to their first unit and find out, oh, that is not what this job is.
Yeah, I definitely had that, especially in fifth group. Because anyone could walk on to it. We had one guy that we called Task Force because he went out and he had his little boonie hat cut down like the Special Forces guys did. He bought all kind of optics and things for his rifle and then didn't know how to use it. But he did that. He was like cosplaying a SF guy because he didn't have it in him to go to selection in the Q course. But when we got into the software organizations that have actual selection processes, the guys that go to those units want to do that job in that unit. They don't want to do somebody else's job. So what's interesting is the more elite the organization is, the more I think content that people doing those enabler jobs are. Certainly I saw that in the 160th and JSOC. And I was, you mentioned the Ranger Regiment creating, and in my battalion, I was a plank holder for JSOC's Joint Exploitation Squadron and their Military Intelligence Brigade. So they really believe in it. It's a huge, robust organization, very capable, and a lot of it is expected from them.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of different things feed that machine at this point. I can only literally imagine what they're up to these days and what they've built on since, 10, 12, 15 years ago. It's pretty wild to think. Speaking about how all of these different sort of intel functions come together, how is the synthesis and the continued evolution of bringing things like open source intelligence? We had a great interview with an OSINT expert on here, Justin Charters, a while back.
Yep.
Signals intelligence, human intelligence, those have all been brought together and synthesized at a pretty high level now at this point. How has that changed the intel landscape? And I want to say I'm particularly interested in this because a lot of, when I was writing the book, Send Me, about Shannon Kent, a lot of what people would talk about of why she was so special was because she could do all those different functions at a very high level, and she was like this hybrid intel professional, and commanders really valued that, shooters really valued that, because they wouldn't have to go to 4 or 5 different people to get something done. They could go to one person and she could do it all. She could do the analysis, she could be there on target with you, she could speak the language, she wouldn't need a translator, any of that sort of stuff. I know there's not a ton of Shannon Kents out there, but certainly the idea of bringing all these disciplines together for a more complete intel picture has evolved over the years. So yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are there, and really how that the expectations of somebody coming into intel has changed because of that.
Yeah, the book that you and Joe Kent wrote about Shannon, everyone should read. Everyone should read Send Me. Oh, what a great story. And Shannon Kent was a unicorn. You identified accurately all the things that she could do. That's not a typical intel professional, not even in SOF. And she was in an organization that coincidentally my father commanded way back in the day. It's got a different name and function now, but my dad was in charge of that unit. And Shannon was the total package, and she could do all those things. Now, what we have is the functionality to do everything that she did, but dispersed in different people. For example, Shannon was a polyglot. You're not going to get a whole bunch of people, SOF or not, that speak 4 or 5 languages as proficiently as she did. To be able to do that signals intelligence work takes a special type of person. But in an organization like a JIATF, a Joint Interagency Task Force, you not only have the different INTs, the different functions, like you mentioned, open source intel, signals intelligence, imagery intelligence, you also have the interagency. So you have organizations that sometimes people don't think of part of the military task force, like the FBI, like the DIA, like Homeland Security, whatever it is. You have this whole package of people in there that bring all these resources together, and they're all chugging along within the commander's intent towards the same purpose. And that has been super helpful on it. So when I think about your question about the evolution of intel, what's been interesting to me, going back all the way to the 90s, is the evolution of open source intel. For me, a guy coming into intel in the 90s, having something like Google Maps that I could just go on the internet on my laptop computer at my house and get imagery that I can use, it would be unimaginable. The speed of communication, security of communications, being able to reach across vast distances. When I was in the 160th, one of my functions was talking the pilots onto the target. When they would go in, we had a giant television that was connected to my laptop, and our S6 had me on headphones, so I could push a button and talk to the pilots to let them know where fire was coming from, or everything's good on the HLZ or whatever. Those types of advantages have been huge.
Yeah, you brought up open source intelligence and how that was a thing. I really think about that as, of all the different INTs, as you call them, the human intelligence, signals intelligence, everything. Yep. I don't think anything has changed more than open source intelligence. One, it really didn't exist until this, the last 20 years, I guess. and the where it's at now, and where it's not just Google Maps, it's social media, it's everything's online now. I mean, it's pretty incredible what a skilled OSINTer can do when given the right tools. But all that being
for sure.
said,
And soldiers tend to be dumb when it comes to stuff on the internet, and I'm lumping myself in there with it. So one of the big reason for the explosion of OSINT, of course, is the internet. And when I joined the Army in the 90s, yeah, the internet was a thing, but it wasn't anything like it was now when you've got the Internet of Things where everything's connected. And I'm thinking to the article I read a couple years ago at this point about guys who are wearing their smartwatches in Syria, and they'd run the perimeter of the base and they'd run all the roads. So anyone who had access to that app, and this was a story in the New York Times, they could map out the entire base. And continuing to hear stories about people on both sides of the Ukraine-Russian war getting catfished online and getting artillery dropped on them because now they got them pinned down because they can't stay off Facebook or Hot or Not or whatever it is they're doing. So there's so many open source things that we can do. It's a huge tool in the intel community, and it's something we have to protect against as well.
Yeah. And for all of that, for everything that you learned throughout the war on terror, what are those lessons learned that can be applied to this new era of gray zone warfare? Because, yeah, open source intelligence, drone warfare, artificial intelligence, everything. I mean, we've shifted from, I mean, we haven't really given up the counter-terror mission, but we've certainly shifted focus to large-scale combat operations, near-peer threats, things like that. I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same, though, in many respects. You know, what are the things that commanders who maybe grew up and cut their teeth in the war on terror are able to use and implement today?
I'm more concerned about the things we're going to have to unlearn. The way that we fought the GWOT was very atypical of the way we fought wars in the past and the way we're probably going to have to fight them in the future. So for one thing, you and I enjoyed complete air supremacy. Not air dominance, not air superiority. Nothing flew in the sky above us. The only thing flying in were the occasional rockets, right? And now with the proliferation of drone warfare and the increasing possibility we might have to fight some actual competent militaries, that the days of just chilling on the fob with the green beans are probably coming to an end. And my organization, the Modern War Institute at West Point, we did a trip to Eastern Europe this summer. We went to Germany, Poland, and Ukraine. And the things that we saw in the conversations we had made me realize we're not ready for that type of warfare. We're not ready for the type of warfare where you can't congregate in anything bigger than a fire team without getting all kind of drones, artillery, airstrikes called in on you. The days of being able to just go get Burger King after a mission are probably not going to be there when you're on a little atoll in the Pacific trying to survive against the Chinese onslaught. So we have to get out of the mindset of the way that we fought the last war, and that's hard to do because I think it was B.H. Liddell Hart that said the only thing harder than getting a new idea into a military mind is getting an old idea out. So for many of my peers who are still doing great things in the military, who came up with us in the GWOT, they're going to have that in the back of their mind. And we need to put that out of our mind and look what's happening now. And the main takeaway I had from the trip to Europe this summer is we're not ready. We're not ready for that type of warfare. We can get there, but we need to start getting on it right now.
These young lieutenants that'll be commissioning, out of West Point this year, or the ones that did last year, who are getting exposed to that. Do you feel confident that the gravity of that task has settled on them? That they have to redefine what things look like in this new era?
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that, Marty, because they're not coming in with a bunch of biases and a bunch of training scars. They're open books, they're sponges. And we talked about this earlier. I didn't graduate from West Point, but I worked here for the last 10 years, and I'm involved in a lot of different things. And one of the things I'm involved in is the Vanguard Initiative, which is a new advanced military skills development program that West Point has just stood up. It's brand new. And they have organized in a lot of different ways. And one of the things they have is a FAST platoon, F-A-S-T, Future Applied Systems team. And these guys are doing all kinds of things with drone, counter-drone robotics. So these guys understand it. They get it. They're paying attention. They're getting exposed to people who have served in Ukraine. We had a bunch of Ukrainian general officers here 2 weeks ago, and the cadets got to talk to them. But the problem is, Marty, they're not the ones in charge. So it's going to take a while for this to percolate up. And of course, there are plenty of general officers and field grade officers who understand and working on it too. But organizationally, I think we need to get there quicker than we're on track to get there at this point.
And part of that is capacity. I've had some great conversations on this podcast in the past about lessons learned out of Ukraine. I mean, we had Nolan Peterson on here, who's like the subject matter expert on that stuff. And, one thing that I thought was interesting is it's not just a will to engage in drone warfare. It's also the capacity to create drones that are cheap enough and fast enough to build. When I think a lot of times in the military, when we think drones, we think predators. We think we think these like all things in the military needs to be fancy, expensive, and complicated, right? If that seems to be the thing, and it needs to take 10 years before it's approved for field use, right? And what we're actually seeing out of Ukraine and some of these other places in the Middle East and elsewhere, conflict areas all over the world are starting to use drones, is they need to be cheap to build. They need the lowest common denominator needs to know how to use them, and needs not just know how to use them, needs to know how to build them and fix them and kind of jimmy rig them with different things. Because the only thing I can think of to compare it to is the way IED tactics changed in the war on terror in Iraq, to where they were the enemy was constantly evolving how they would implement improvised explosive devices, and you'd have to come up with new counters to that all the time. And you saw some really amazing field expedient solutions to that by
that's right.
The ingenuity of the common soldier continues to baffle me. But with drones, it's the same way, where not just countering them, but also implementing them. As soon as a new counter comes up with, you have to evolve it. And the lifespan of a drone tactic can be 2 or 3 weeks in some cases. And right now, I think they're trying to get there, but right now, I don't think our military is built to move that fast.
No, that's part of the problem that we have. And of course, it's not just with drones, it's the entire process. And we also don't want to rush to failure in the system and buy a bunch of stuff that doesn't work. But if I were in charge, or if I were giving advice to someone in charge, that would be one of the things that I would say. We've got to speed up procurement. We've got to encourage that type of innovation. We've got to reduce distractions on things that aren't directly related to war fighting. And there's a lot that goes into war fighting. You got to take care of troops, et cetera. But we got to reduce those types of things. We got to look for more ways that we can be innovative and collaborative. And the process takes too long. I think a good way to do it, and this might be happening as far as I know, is turn a bunch of really smart people loose with a bunch of money and let them talk to people and find out what they can come up with. There's so much collaboration building.
I think that's almost like a future field problem that we have. And right now I think commanders are going to have to get comfortable with, there's going to need to be operational funds that are made available to like the squad level. And not unlike an ODA has operational funds to work with, but they have a higher level of trust and responsibility to have that. But your average infantry squad may need to have an op fund to where they can go out and procure drones or drone equipment off commercial shelves and implement that. And that might be a future field problem, where you have to go out and basically make yourself drone capable with, hey, you've got $500, go in 2 days. Get drones in the air, and they need to be lethal, and that's something that right now, it's not even do we have the capacity to do that? I don't think commanders know how to deliver that responsibility, because typically, like, unit equipment purchases, there's a very deliberate program for that. It's very difficult for anybody outside of the tippiest top of the special operations spear to go out and get equipment that is not military issue. And it's not a matter of money, it's a matter of being approved to use that for liability reasons. And in the case of drones, hey, don't go out and get a DJI drone, because that's all going to make its way. That information is going to make its way back to China, So there's even some OPSEC concerns there and PERSEC concerns there. So it's like, how do we enable the lowest level leaders, that young PL, that young captain, one, give them the power to delegate that authority, but then how do they delegate that authority in a responsible way?
That's right. And one way to get after that type of thing, especially in the special operations community, but not limited to that, is to reach out in innovative ways and look for new partners. So going on for a long time here at West Point, certainly before I came to the academy, but going on till today, there's a strong sense of partnership with outside organizations for things like capstone projects for cadets. So, for example, an organization, a unit, could say, "Hey, cadets, you're interested in researching this counter drone thing. Here's what I'm looking for. Here are your left and right parameters. This is what my deliverable wants to be. Here's a bunch of money, and I'll check in with you at 3 months, and we'll go from there." And let them see what they can come up with. And in a situation like that, you're going to get high performing cadets who are going to care about it because they get a grade out of it. And it's something that they can ruminate on for an entire year, that they can experiment on. And if I wanted to figure something out, like how to break something, then I would get cadets or rangers in there to do it. So if you want to think about something like, how do I counter this drone? I guarantee you these smart cadets here would figure that out in a way that was cost effective and useful. So that's just one example, but there could be partnership with, say, Georgia Tech. Mm-hmm. There could be any manner of ways that organizations can partner with. The problem is the incentive structures aren't always aligned. Innovation is costly and takes a bunch of time. And a lot of times people's bosses don't care about collaboration. There's no collaboration block on people's eval. So why would they ever do it? They're much rather stay in their comfortable little silo doing things that are going to pay off in the short run versus this long run. That's one of the problems we have with this innovation.
Should there be a collaboration block on an NCOER or OER?
I haven't looked at one in so long, Marty. Maybe they put one on by this time you and I got out. But I've seen that here at West Point. When I first got hired in 2013, when I was over at the Department of Social Sciences, we had the dean side, which was the academic side. We had the commandant side, which was the discipline and the military science and stuff like that. And they overlapped on the margins, and certainly at the top, the dean and the commandant are friends. But in the main, in the middle management, there wasn't a whole lot. There was very much a divide between them. And then after 3 years in Department of Social Sciences and SOC, I went over to the commandant side and headed up the officership capstone. And then when I came back the second time, I was in the Department of Military Instruction. So I've seen it from both sides. So I think when we have leaders that compel that force that expect that collaboration, like we did in JSOC, General McChrystal and Admiral Raven made people cooperate. And eventually it became the way we always did it, and people saw that it worked well, so that they started doing it naturally. I think that you have to make people work together. I mean, we had Goldwater Nichols, a little act of Congress to make the different branches work together back in the 80s. So you got to force people to do it. And eventually, if you do it right and they see the value in it, it'll be the way we've always done it. And then you have to force it less.
You know, when we think about the larger sort of macro picture of AI and drones, you know, for these, again, I think about the young lieutenants coming in, young intelligence professionals, both military and civilian. How are things like AI and drones changing these career fields, changing the type of people that need to come in to these career fields?
Yeah, technical skills are becoming more and more important. So I was a relatively late joiner in the ChatGPT AI thing, but Marty, I use it all the time now. I am a believer in it. I understand its limitations, but it's made my job so much easier in terms of writing, editing, things like that. So one of the things I do at the Modern War Institute is I run our Modern War Journal, and I could take someone's 5,000 word article that they wrote, drop it into AI, and tell it to, hey, give me a 250 word abstract. And it does it in a matter of minutes, which was great because doing abstracts takes me such a long time. And writing op orders, you could use it for that. You could use it for any number of things. One of the people I'm advising on his dissertation is doing it on decision making, strategic level decision making in AI. So we should always have human in the loop. I remember I asked ChatGPT for a quote about something called Sandhurst, which is a big military skills program competition here at West Point. And it gave me this beautiful quote written by our 3-star, by our superintendent. I'm like, oh man, this is perfect for this article I want to write. And then I started looking for the link and I couldn't find it. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, hey man, where'd you get this quote? And he said, oh, I made it up for you. Like, I was all proud of it. Like, hey man, don't do that. So we got to be careful about it. But I think getting good at technical skills is something that every Intel professional needs to. And before you could get by if you're good at PowerPoint, do a little Excel, know your way around Word, but you got to get in it now, man. You got to understand how to ask the right prompts with ChatGPT. You have to keep on top of things like Maven. You have to get in deep on how to use Palantir. You really have to hone those technical skills. But moreover, you got to be intellectually curious about it. So many times we were able to improve processes because some smart E4 was in here. What does this button do? What does this do? I wonder if I can get it to do this, and see how well that worked out for us. That intellectual curiosity pays off.
Yeah, on that AI piece and using it, I also think it's very helpful, but you have to, like you said, understand the limitations. I've also seen the issue with quotes before. There's not a single thing that I'll take out of AI that I don't verify through LinkedIn. I've gotten used to putting in my prompts now of like cite your sources, include links to your sources, so I can go directly to them. I'll use this interview as an example. I told it to, hey, can you, Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Faint, can you give me bullet points of his career so I can then craft a introduction to introduce him to our audience? And it gave me all these really great bullet points. And the problem is a lot of those bullet points, though, correlated to this bio page that you have on, I think, Small Wars Journal or something like that, that had nothing to do with the bullet point. And I was like, where are you coming up with this? And so you can't completely trust it. One of the ways that I use it is I'll typically use it for like, hey, give me a list of the 10 best articles written on this topic so I can better understand. The whole idea behind subject matter expert here, it's not just a military show or a veteran show or something like that. I'm trying to get a wide variety of people on here, and I have, from firearms experts to reporters, authors. We had Dr. Avi Loeb on here from Harvard to talk about unidentified aerial phenomena. Like, there's all sorts of stuff out there. And so for me, I have to come up to speed on some of these topics pretty quickly. And I use ChatGPT to say, hey, give me the articles that I need to click through to and read these, rather than me going out and reading 100 articles that may or may not be helpful. Here's 10 that I know will be helpful, and is a little bit more accurate than just whoever SEO'd their article the best to show up at the top of Google, right? And so it's like, you got to be careful with those things.
Yeah, I had ChatGPT write an article about me for the Havok Journal just to see what it would say about me, and it had some interesting results on it. It talked about my Valor Awards and all this other stuff. As you know, I don't have any Valor Awards. I got 4 Bronze Stars, but they're all for merit. I don't have any Valor Awards. And then I had to generate an image of me. First of all, it refused to generate an image of an actual person. So then I had to explain to it, it's not for an actual person. And then the image, I used it in the Havok Journal article. It gave me a 1st Cavalry Division combat patch, which I've never served in or anywhere near the 1st Cavalry Division. And then my rank was a Black Star. They made me an 07, a Brigadier General. I was like, oh, thanks, ChatGPT, which of course I never attained. So when you talk about subject matter experts and the people that you had on, I think the most recent one I listened to, Marty, was the investigative reporter doing the story about the fuel contamination
Kevin Nodell
in Hawaii. Yeah. First of all, great work by him. Great interview there. So I don't know if you know this, Marty. I lived basically across the highway from Red Hill when my wife and I were.
That's right. I always think that you've been at West Point for the last, as long as I've known you. Basically, I forget that you did some time out there in Hawaii and in the Pacific.
Well, it was a very forgettable time. It was a 3-year tour. I tried to curtail right away. We won't go into the details on it because I think you've heard this story before. But I went because I thought I was going to retire. I got invited to apply for a unit a new unit they were standing up at JSOC, for which I was genuinely uniquely suited for. I was retiring because my branch told me my dwell time was too high. They wanted to send me to Congo, and I wasn't going to go to Congo. So I was very rude to my branch manager, and then this job came up. I applied and ended up not getting it because they had already identified the person who they wanted for the job before they announced it, which happens. As you know, it happens in the soft community all the time. So, but then I had a situation where I had pulled my retirement paperwork and I had to leave West Point because my replacement was on the way. And I went into the Army Assignment Interactive Module, AIM, which is like Tinder for assignments. You go in, units and people swipe left to right. And a unit called USARPAC had swiped right on me, and I never heard of that before. And found out it was Honolulu, Hawaii, which sounded a lot better than Congo, so I ended up there. Now, what had happened was my former boss at JSOC, Jason Chung, had seen my name on the available list and pulled me into USARPAC. And things were great there until he retired, and then his replacement just made life awful for everybody there. I ended up coming back. But yeah, so I did a couple years there. But I lived in AMR, Aleemanu Military Reservation, which was right across the highway from Red Hill. I've been on Red Hill. I've seen the outside, of course. I didn't have business inside of it. These fuel bunkers. And there's all types of things everywhere in there. AMR has an old World War II, Cold War level, like abandoned bunker complex inside the mountain there. There's all kind of stuff. So it doesn't surprise me at all there were problems, and I was interested to binge listen to that article while I was on my way to Tampa. I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, Kevin was awesome to have in here. I was fortunate to get him in studio, even though he lives in Hawaii. He happened to be out here for on the East Coast here for a visit. And yeah, if people haven't listened to that one, I learned a lot about sort of maritime laws and maritime activity in general that is just super fascinating. I mean, as I say that out loud, it probably doesn't sound fascinating, but you have to take my word for it. It was really interesting. So, you've served with both the Special Operations Aviation and ground units. What do non-specialists misunderstand about how special operations actually integrate intel, aviation, and partner forces?
So there's a lot that people misunderstand about SOF, and I see this a lot here at West Point. One of the most annoying things that someone can say to me, especially a West Point cadet, a new West Point cadet, can tell me is that I like to think outside the box. I deeply dislike that for a number of reasons. And Marty, you and I have talked about this before. Discipline initiative is baked into Mission Command.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need you to think outside the box. The box is my commander's intent. If you're outside the box, you're outside my intent, and you're not doing the things you need to do. So yes, I expect you to be innovative. I expect you to have innovation, but I want you inside the box. Also, people who say that typically haven't spent the time to understand what's in the box in the first place and why those borders exist. So I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that, especially from a West Point.
You got to know the rules before you can break them.
100%. So you got to know why it's there first. Mm-hmm. So if you're exercising disciplined intent with disciplined initiative within the leader's intent, you're fine. You're fine about that. So that's the first thing. And you and I know, because we spent so much time in those communities. Yeah, we have rules. Mm-hmm. We have rules. They exist for a reason, and they are tied to our freedom of maneuver. All those times where we had congressional senatorial delegations come to my facility in Bagram, and I could just throw open the doors and they could see anything they wanted because we had nothing to hide because we were scrupulous rule followers. Yeah, that happened. Now, our rules weren't the same as everybody else's rules, but the rules were there. Mm-hmm. And we're not cowboys. So that's the biggest misconception. If you think that you're just going to go to special operations community and you can walk around with a NYPD fire hat, NYFD fire hat, and your hands in your pockets and your beard and your hair down, there are people who can do that, but it's probably not you, and that's not what you need to come there for. So spend some time learning what's in the box, get some discipline and some humility, and then go over to SOF. Now, in terms of what interactions and what capabilities they have, I think a lot of times people look at what SOF is doing and say they can't do it. And F3AAD is a classic example. One of the biggest critiques of F3AAD is it's a soft targeting cycle and you have to have all these resources. No, you don't. You can do F3EAD with a squad. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter who it is. It is a mindset.
Infinitely scalable.
As much as it is a process. Yes. Yeah. And you get in there and you get that collaborative spirit, you get that innovation going, you get that collaboration going, you have that systems approach to it. You just get in there and start doing it. And you make sure flattening the organization, which is a very hard thing for people to do. I've never had a conversation with General McChrystal about it, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I got to imagine that making these people get together and work together had to be just a huge drama to try to get all these disparate organizations who are very much used to not having anybody else in their rice bowl now have to start working together. Had to be a monumental lift of the century in terms of leadership. I think it's worthy of additional study, and it's something that I don't think General McChrystal gets enough credit for. The way he could take all those organizations, make them work together, and then expand that out and change the need to know paradigm of SOF into a responsibility to share. I think that's another misconception people have about the SOF community, especially at the national level the national task force level. We're all about the collaboration. I remember back in the day, you might remember this too, Marty, we would take officers straight out of the basic course and put them in the task force as augmentees. They called it quick start. I hope it's still going on today. So you snatch up these highly qualified officers, super fit, super smart. Hey, guess what, homie? You're going to go hang out with the Ranger Regiment in Syria for a couple months. And they get them in the door. They make them augmentees. They train them up, and they kick them back out to the general purpose force. And I'm sure if those guys stay in long enough, they'll come back to SOF. But what a great opportunity, both for the individuals and for the task force, to have that pool of highly motivated talent that you just kind of need to point at a problem and turn them loose. I think that's another misconception as well.
It helps too with conventional leaders, even if they never do return to special operations, understanding how and what special operations is, preventing some of these misunderstandings or misconceptions. You know, officers like, you know, famously General Schwarzkopf, the commander who led Desert Storm, famously was not a fan of special operations forces. Did not see the utility in them. I think that he was basically forced to implement them in the capacity that he did. Is like, I guess you guys can go look for the scuds, you know, stay out of the way. You know, and that's, there's very few commanders I think left that are that extreme. I think everybody understands at some level what the value is, but there's definitely varying opinions out there. And, you know, the more officers that come through and have some touch point, the better, you know. And a lot of times if they are selected for those ones, they're the ones that have the higher probability of making to those higher ranks, because they are, I mean, right. A lot of times those guys those second lieutenants that would show up, because in the Ranger Regiment, at least, I don't know if things have changed, but when I was there, the lowest officer rank was a captain or a first lieutenant promotable. That would be a captain very shortly. Right. But we would have second lieutenants from West Point show up, and a lot of times these guys would show up with combat diver badges on already, or free fall badges on. Yep. And so they'd already had some touch points where it's like, oh, this person, they're getting an internship at the Ranger Regiment and they've already got a combat diver badge. Yeah, they're going to be a general someday. Bare minimum, a colonel, if they stay in. Some of them are going to get out and go become executives in Fortune 50 companies, you know, and that's the truth. But the other thing too, I wanted to touch on, I'm just curious, just your opinion on this. You talked about sort of the protection of information and you know, part of collaboration is you have to share information. There's things like the Five Eyes program and things like that, where we share information, not just across the military, but with allied forces, and sometimes very sensitive information. You know, do you think that within the military that there is a problem with overclassification?
Oh, 100%. There's a problem unit to unit with it. And honestly, Marty, you might have seen this as well. A large part of the overclassification program problem is the default settings on email. So the default setting, when I was operational 15 years ago, everything we did was with the default email setting was secret no foreign, which means it's a secret level email and you can't share with any foreign personnel. Now that email might be, hey, are you ready to go to lunch? But because this is a default setting and people are too lazy to go unclick a bunch of buttons before you send it, then it goes out as that, and that information is protected. There's also more restricted caveats called ORCON, organizational control, which certain three-letter agencies were notorious for using, which means you're not supposed to share with anybody else unless the originating organization gives you permission to do it. So there's a lot of information hoarding. There was an attitude that knowledge is power, and then there was the laziness of not changing the blocks on the classification. Another thing that General McChrystal did was he broke all that down, especially partner sharing information. There was a situation when I was in Iraq, I think it was my second tour, where we were getting information from the Brits, and General McChrystal made a Brit my deputy for this organization that I was running for him. It was highly controversial at the time. I was all for it. And the Brit came to me with this information we got from Basra. It's like, hey, here you go. So I got that information. I put it out in our channels. When I got it back, it was classified secret no foreign, and it came from the Brits, which meant if I followed that classification guidance, being a good intel officer like I am, that I couldn't share it with the guy that gave it to me in the first place. It was patently ridiculous. So what General McChrystal did was he was in charge of the intelligence that originated with his unit. He had the original classification authority. So if it came from a task force unit, then we could make it REL. We had the releasable. We had the ability to do that. Especially when the classific, you look at a report, it's like, all right, what makes this classified? Well, it's the source information. What's the source information? Iraqi Sunni male. Come on, man. Come on. Do we really need to make this a secret, no foreign report? No, I guess you're right. We can make this secret REL. Okay, great. Thank you. So we made a lot of progress that way. So there has been a reluctance for organizations to share intel. Earlier in this very podcast, I told you my personal vignette of being in fifth group and then trying to knock on the door to National Mission Force and then getting into that organization a little bit later on. The maturity of special operations, especially the more elite organizations, realizing that we're stronger together, I think has been huge for everybody involved. Instead of stiff arming everybody, like what happened to me when I was in fifth group, now we're bringing them in. Oh, you can contribute? All right, let's have a conversation about it. And sharing the information that needs to be shared and protecting the information that genuinely needs to be protected. So General McChrystal's attitude was share till it hurts. Share till it hurts, which was a sea change of what it was like before that. It was like, hey, these organizations don't even exist. Like, come on, man. I'm sitting in your headquarters talking to you right now. I know this organization exists. Let's just work through this. And that has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, really curious I want to kind of transition the conversation over here to international relations. And,
okay.
You know, when we look at the United States, Japan, Republic of Korea, Camp David framework that really was supposed to promise deeper trilateral coordination, from an intelligence view, from Charlie Faint's eyes, you know, what does that actually look like beyond the press release in implementation?
So serving in U.S. Army Pacific was an eye-opener for me. I did 2-year-long tours in the Republic of Korea relatively early in my career. My wife was in at the time. Marty, you met her. You know,
wonderful.
She's a vet also. So my wife, yeah. and my daughters are much bigger than they were when you came by to see us at West Point now. So my wife and I served 2 years in the 2nd Infantry Division this was pre-SOF time. And I got a little bit of a window into the Pacific, but I was very focused on North Korea. And yeah, China was a player, but I was very focused on those thousands of artillery pieces that I was within range of being there, the division headquarters at Uijeongbu. It wasn't until I came back, USARPAC, when I was lieutenant colonel. I'd been in, at that point, over 20 years, really had my eyes open to China and how terrified everyone in that region is of the big bully in that area. And China's doing some ridiculous things, Marty. They got their Belt and Road debt trap diplomacy. And the most ridiculous thing is this 9-dash line. For your listeners who aren't familiar with it, they should look it up. It's just like, hey, China just declared, hey, all this stuff inside here, this arbitrary literal 9 dashes that I drawn, it's all mine now. All these shoals, all these islands, all this other stuff, all these resources, it's mine. All this fishing. It's ridiculous. But what they become really good at is this thing called creeping normalcy. Well, they'll do some weird shit. They'll occupy an island, or they'll build an island, or they'll start dredging up stuff, and they'll do some provocative flybys of Taiwan. They'll do this, and they'll keep doing it, and they'll keep doing it, and until we've just kind of normalized it, and people don't talk about it anymore. Nobody talks anymore about how China built a bunch of islands and put air defense artillery on it, or how they're regularly attacking Filipino fishermen and Marines with things like fire suppression cannons and things like that, or ramming their ships. Well, that's just China being China. And they get everybody used to it. It's kind of like what Hamas did to the Israelis. Get used to these provocations, get used to people running up to the fences, get used to ships rushing at Taiwan and then veering off, the bombers flying over, and get people used to it until they need to go all the way. So I'm very worried about China. They keep increasing their capabilities, and we keep being distracted by the thing.
It's insane to me how far China is willing to go on advancing some of these initiatives. You know, when I found out that, you know, that reporting came out that they had literal police stations set up inside the United States cities, the tactics they use against the Chinese diaspora. I mean, it's pretty wild. And the other nations that are in that hemisphere, they're right to be pretty nervous about it.
Yeah.
It's no different than you ask any Lithuanian or Latvian how they feel about Russia and how well they sleep at night, knowing they're right next door. Not very well. They sleep with one eye open over there, and I imagine it's the same if you're in Japan right now, or you're in South Korea, or Thailand, or Cambodia, or any of these other places. I guess Cambodia, they've got plenty of other things to worry about as well. But there's a lot of these countries in that hemisphere that, I'm sure they think that it's not if, but when it's going to come to a head.
100%. Everyone's super nervous, and they're doing the best they can. It's easy for Americans to look at this and say, "Oh, these are fair weather friends. They're just going wherever the wind blows." What are they supposed to do? Mm-hmm. And it's, you mentioned we're going to talk about international relations, which is what I went to grad school for and what I taught when I first got to West Point. And these things that are happening right now with Ukraine, with Israel, out in the Pacific, just further indicate to me the truth of the one true IR religion, which is realism, which is exemplified all the way back in the time of Thucydides, the Greek historian, who said that the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. So you've got to be strong, or you've got to have strong friends in order to survive in this anarchic international environment that we all live in. The problem is you can't count on anyone other than yourself. We saw with Ukraine, we lots of organizations, lots of countries signed agreements with Ukraine. Hey, give up your nukes, you'll be all right. And then they weren't all right, and then now they're
just a nukeless,
feckless person.
Yeah,
I don't blame them for giving up their nukes. What are they going to do with them? They got the shit sanctioned out of them if they didn't. But just another reminder that you can't count on anybody else. So in addition to living in Korea and Hawaii, I spent some time in the Philippines as well. And it was my last deployment, and I'm going to put air quotes around deployment because I was deployed to a hotel in Manila when I was working with Joint U.S. Military Assistance Group, Philippines there. And that was interesting as well. And an example of open source, I would read the newspaper every morning in the hotel breakfast. They had an English language newspaper, and just to see everything that was going on in there. And one of the things that really got my attention was how much of the Filipino electrical infrastructure was owned by China. Mm-hmm. They knew it was happening. This wasn't an intel report. It's in the Manila Times or whatever it was I was reading. And I looked at and I could hear China saying, "Hey, Philippines, nice electricity you got there. Shame if anything should happen to it," when it comes to things like basing, security arrangements, and things like that. But I think the United States is still everybody's partner of choice for folks that don't want to completely get dominated by an authoritarian country. So it'll be interesting to see how things work out with the Philippines, China, Japan. Lots of folks are feeling that Chinese dragon breathing down the back of their neck, and they know that their best chance for success is being close to the United States.
Yeah, specifically in the Philippines, we have the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with them. Can you kind of break down what that is? I'm sure with you being in Manila, you were probably familiar with what that actually looks like in implementation, and how does that impact logistics and sort of early threat detection in the area?
Right. So if we were on Facebook and we were looking at the relationship between Philippines and the United States, the relationship status would be it's complicated, right? So there was a time when they kicked us out and we came back, and now there's a limit on who we can do things with and what we can do there. That is a tough nut to crack because of the diverging national interests. So, for example, when I was working with JustMag, there was a list of not only units, but individual commanders that we could not work with because of human rights violations allegations. That was a huge problem. And some of these people led extremely capable units, and they were high ranking in the Filipino military, but we couldn't work with them. So that's one example of complication. Now, this partnership that you mentioned gives us some basing privileges and some use of territory, but it's something that's easily rescinded if the next time that Filipino strongman decides that he's mad again because we're telling him about his civil rights violations. When I was in the Philippines, there was an article that I still remember that the Filipino president was bragging about having drug dealers cut up and thrown to Manila Bay. This is in the newspaper. This isn't a rumor. This is a quote from the guy. So it's hard for us to get that relationship. Now, I think personalities matter, and I think Pacific Pathways was a series of exercises that Indo-Pacific Command would run not only in the Philippines, but throughout that entire region. So you get people working together, especially when they're young. They have these relationships. So when they come back as colonels, as general officers, and they're dealing with the guy who's might be the president of that country, they have those relationships in place. So these new basing arrangements, these new cooperation agreements and things like that, extremely helpful, but I worry about their durability.
Is something like the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, is that short of a formal SOFA or Status of Forces Agreement, or does a Status of Forces Agreement have to be in place before something like the EDCA can be signed?
I think they're two different things, because we've always had a Status of Forces Agreement that just negotiates how they're going to treat our people. I think those are two different things, but they are related. And you mentioned the SOFA. When I was in the Philippines, the Just Mad compound abutted the siege of Sodef. And at the time, there was a U.S. service member who was being held prisoner under American control at that compound because he got drunk and murdered a trans prostitute that he didn't know was actually male. So there was a huge dust up about this. The Filipinos wanted him in their prison. America was like, no, we're not going to do that. The Filipinos wanted him dead. This was a huge deal. Lots of people were really upset in the Philippines. And the solution they came up with under the Status of Forces Agreement that seemed to pacify everybody was he's going to do his time under American control in the Philippines. So that's one of the reasons these issues, like with the Marines in Okinawa, it seems like every couple months there's a story there. And the strategic level thing that some Lance Corporal could go out, and even if he doesn't do anything wrong, he could go down to a bar and someone could start a fight with him, or he never even met this woman that says she raped him, whatever. They could have those strategic level consequences. It's a hard road to negotiate, but I think this agreement with the Philippines is a step in the right direction. I hope it holds up.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I've never been to the Philippines. I've been a lot of places around the world, but East Asia is, the Western Pacific. It is a big sort of black hole in my map of places I've been to. I need to get over there because I think I could better understand some of these issues just by getting sort of, Nikes on the ground there. And it's hard to imagine what it must be like for U.S. service members over in some of these places where it's just culturally radically different. And South Korea has been dealing with it for a long time. Germany is, but Okinawa gets the most attention. And I think that's because it's a cultural thing where the Japanese society is actually very unfriendly towards foreigners. The sort of stuff that's going on over there where we have a aligned interest in countering China and working with these foreign partners and trying to push back against Chinese influence and fight for influence in some of these countries, I think is a really interesting thing, and it's going to hopefully pay dividends in the future. But the way the culture is misaligned sometimes, like with the Japanese, where there's a very strict line between what is for Japanese people and what is for everybody else, what is for tourists, and all the way down to the restaurants and different establishments that people can visit. It's very interesting and not something I think you see in other Asian countries. And so I think when things happen like this against Japanese people in Okinawa, it's even more pronounced among the local populace than it is in a place like South Korea or Germany or Italy or the Philippines or something like that. And it's fascinating stuff. But this is the reality of the world that we live in right now, and we are in this era of gray zone warfare. We're not really in the GWAT anymore, but we haven't really left counterterrorism behind. We're worrying about large-scale combat operations and our ability to conduct those, and drone warfare, and low-intensity conflict at hotspots all over the world. The military is tasked with a lot these days. As far as these sort of gray zone infractions, you've already brought up a few of them that China has done. How do you think these are impacting the negotiations we have at a very high level between the United States and China? Things like tariffs and what we can and can't do in the South China Sea and things like that.
I hope they're having a lot of impact on what we're doing, because those types of things can create strategic impacts. So one of the things that China regularly did when I was in USARPAC is they engage in this thing they call shouldering, which is basically warships playing chicken with each other. So one ship will come up along another and like try to cut in front of them. They call it shouldering to like when you body check someone with your shoulder. And it only takes somebody getting killed or some warship getting damaged in millions of dollars for that to spin out of control, or another plane to get captured or something like that, any number of things. So I hope these are all playing on it at strategic level conversations, because these are strategic level decisions by China. Let's see what we can get away with. What can we inflict on our creeping normalcy today to set us up for a better strategic position down the road?
If you were the national security advisor today, and you're looking at East Asia, the Western Pacific, that Indo-Pacific area, what are your top 3 collection priorities that you're putting out to the force?
Yeah, power projection by China. So what are their power projection platforms? They keep messing around with aircraft carriers. Eventually, they'll probably develop one that's capable, that isn't kind of laughable. I'm more concerned about their missiles and their bombers, because we often think when we're looking at China, we talk about island chains. People talk about the first island chain, second island chain. So you got the first island chain, which is like down to the Philippines, second island chain, which is out to Guam. How can we compete with them in the first and second island chain? And what do they have that can project past the second island chain that can impact all those supplies and personnel and capabilities that need to come across what we call that tyranny of distance of the Pacific to get there? So power projection platforms is probably the first and foremost. The second one is going to be economics. How can we negatively impact China's economics? How can we protect ours? You have the Straits of Malacca that are out there in the West, where some astronomical amount of trade and fuel flow through. How can we make sure that those aren't being negatively impacted? How can we keep the Chinese fishing fleets, and they have much of their fishing fleet is paramilitary. It's kind of like National Guard or Coast Guard. That's how they function. And how can we keep them from just raping the shoals out there and just like clear catching all of it and seizing all of those oil and gas deposits that are in the bottom of the ocean there. And the last thing that I think we need to be worried about is the information war. So how are we competing against China with that? How many Chinese nationals are we letting into our schools? How much are we allowing them to buy up property here, especially property that's strategically located like in big cities or that are next to military bases? How are we doing those things? And concurrent with all of that is, how are we keeping ahead of them in AI and drones? Because everything else that I mentioned is affected by those things as well.
Yeah, and when it comes to AI and drones, we may be in a situation, I don't know for sure, but we may be in a situation where we need to catch up first before we can get ahead. But yeah, we need to have the ability to be ahead for sure on that. That's all very interesting things to me and kind of in line with what I thought you might say, but particularly when it comes to those power projections and getting out to first chain, second chain, all that's I hadn't heard that before. So it's really interesting stuff. And it's a place that we have to keep an eye on. Another area of the world that we're all too familiar with in America is the Middle East. You've spent a lot of time in the Middle East, but you've spent specifically a lot of time in Israel. You've done annual trips there for many, many years. A lot of interaction between, you've had a lot of interaction with the IDF and things like that. And so, of course, Israel and the Palestinians and just Israel and the broader region have not gotten along great over the, past 6-7 decades and further. But since Israel was a state, it's been a lot of conflict, but it's been very pronounced since the October 7th attacks in 2022. There's been a lot of combat there, and then some pauses, some short-lived ceasefires, some longer-lived ones, but not rigorously enforced, so on and so forth. When you look at this Israel-Hamas Hezbollah situation and the dynamics and how they keep shifting, what are the indicators that you're looking for that would maybe let us know whether there's an escalation coming or containment maybe being right around the corner? Is there anything we can look out for as civilians?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is going to be a somewhat lengthy answer, and I need to preface it by saying this is my own opinion, not the opinion of West Point of the United States government. But I have been interested in this area for a very long time. So back when I was an infantry officer in 101st, we and the 82nd would regularly do rotations to a place called Sharm el-Sheikh, which is on the eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula. So it's in Egypt. It's a resort area largely because the Americans were there, and we would do 6-month peacekeeping missions in there, which, Marty, was a great gig because back in 1998, you might remember that there was a lot of peace breaking out between Egypt and Israel. People just wanted to make money. There was no drama. It was from like a kinetic standpoint, the lamest deployment ever, which meant it was a very good deployment because nobody was getting hurt. So because we had some time on our hands, we got to go into Israel, got to go all over Egypt, took a side trip into Jordan as well. Technically set foot in Syria. Lebanon, went across the border where there's a little creek, came back. I mean, it was a whole deal. So I got really interested in it there, seeing the different sites, seeing like in the old city in Jerusalem, all that history that you've heard so much about. Even if you're not religious, it's just beautiful historically. So I got interested in it then. And then when I was in grad school, I met a young undergrad named Uriel who wanted to create a trip that would help provide a nuanced view of the Israel-Palestine conflict because there's too much polarization, as you mentioned. And he was interested in getting people over who maybe didn't know a lot about the conflict, basically people who were persuadable that there was a path to peace and get these young people going. So that turned into something called PDLI, the Peace and Dialogue Leadership Initiative, which is a year-long fellowship that takes place annually that involves top students from Yale University, because that's where I was when I met Uriel, and West Point. And it puts them together, and this year-long fellowship, it culminates with 10 days of boots on the ground in Israel and Palestine. And every year I learn something new going over there, Marty. And one thing that I think in the culmination of having done these trips for most of 10 years, obviously we didn't go during COVID, and I personally didn't go the last 2 years because of the war. The Yaleys went, they weren't scared, but Department of Defense didn't want us to go, which I get. So we didn't go a couple of years, but the program has been in place for 10 years. And you can only make peace with people that want it. And people don't want peace if they know if they start something, then someone's going to come in and separate the belligerents and throw a bunch of money your way. So there was an article that I read when I was in grad school by an author called, I think it was Luttwak was his name. It's called Give War a Chance. And it was highly provocative at the time. It's got a provocative title, but basically it was a primer on what happens when you separate people who aren't willing to stop fighting yet. And we've seen this in the barracks. You see it in the schoolyards. If you get in there and you pull people apart before they get it out, before there's a clear winner, they're going to fight later. And that's what we've been seeing for decades with Hamas in Gaza. And I'm specifically differentiating between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and between PA, Hamas, and the Palestinian people. So I think there can be peace between Israel and the Palestinian people, but there cannot be peace between Israelis or anyone else for that matter who's not Hamas with Hamas. And if you look at their charter, they're committed to the destruction of Israel. That's why they say things from the river to the sea, because between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea is the entire state of Israel. So it is difficult for me to see how there can be any type of lasting peace between someone who's committed to someone's destruction and the people who don't want to be destroyed. So that's been an interesting seeing that dynamic play out. I've never been into Gaza proper. I can't go because I'm still a DoD employee, but I have been extensively through Israel on our many trips, and because of the nature of PDLI, we get some pretty high level engagement with the Palestinian Authority and with the Israeli government and IDF leaders. But it's hard to me to see how there could be a lasting peace with Hamas. So I think that if we want to save the Palestinian people, if we want two states for two peoples, which is something I believe in, I believe the Palestinians deserve their own state, Hamas has got to be completely defeated. And you don't do that by throwing billions at it every couple of months and letting them continue to exist until they can build up again and attack again, which I think is exactly what's going to happen if Hamas continues to exist.
Yeah. So what are the what should we be looking for as far as, is there like a turn in the game? You know, what, like, is containment right around the corner? Is defeat of Hamas right around the corner? Or is this just going to keep going on and on and on?
So the change has got to come from the people, and the people will only change when things become bad enough. And this isn't unique to Gaza or the Palestinians or anything else. So as long as they think they have a chance of winning, why would they ever quit fighting? We won in Japan and Korea, Japan and Germany, because the Japanese and the Germans know they lost and they don't want to fight anymore. Hamas doesn't think they've lost. And to some degree, they're right because they continue to exist. So I think what we're seeing now with Israelis is a program of containment. They've shut off the connection of land between Gaza and Egypt. They're going to hold on to that from now on because so much stuff was coming across the border that way. There was so much hue and cry over Gaza being denied things that we would think of as dual use. You can't have that because you might use that against us. And then the counter that was like, that's ridiculous. We never use something like a glider to attack Israel. You're just being silly. You're just repressing them. And then, of course, that's exactly what they did. There's dozens of examples, hundreds of examples of things being used that should be used for taking care of the Palestinian people being used to try to kill Israelis. Things like pulling up the water pipes to make them into rockets to shoot at them. Things like using hundreds, thousands of tons of concrete to build bunkers. So I think what we're going to have to see over time is an erosion of support for Hamas. And I think that might have been something that prompted the October 7th attacks. They sensed that there was about to be another breakthrough. Perhaps Saudi Arabia was going to sign some type of deal with Israelis like the Egyptians did. So they had to kick something off in order to try to remain relevant. But as long as support exists, as long as billions of dollars keep going to UNRWA and directly into the hands of Hamas, why would they ever stop fighting? I wouldn't. So we've got to reduce the support for Hamas while we protect, sustain, and improve the lives of the Palestinian people in that area. And I think one of the ways that they could do that is show success in the areas that the Palestinian Authority controls. And that's hard also for the PA over there in the West Bank area. They have so many things that they're dealing with, including their leader, President Abbas, who is 81 and last had an election something like 12, 15, 20, I don't know, a long time ago, years ago. So I think that if we had elections in the West Bank right now, Hamas might win there as well. So we have to reduce support for Hamas, have to increase the support for peace with the Palestinian people. And I think over time, we keep the pressure on Hamas. Eventually, we could probably not stomp them out entirely. It's hard to stomp out an idea, but get it to a place where both peoples can have their own lands and peace for their children.
That's what most people want is, the less wars going on, the less fighting going on, the better the world is. That's certainly true in the Middle East and as it is anywhere else. Shifting over to Iraq, I want to bring this up because we just had a couple of Americans killed in Syria the other day, and it's heartbreaking to see. It's just, they're not the first Americans killed in Syria or in the Iraq-Syria area on the counter-ISIS mission. ISIS as a organization has been defeated for many years at this point, but it still has underground operatives. They're operating as a true terrorist organization at this point, and they're, the U.S. and Iraqi and other partners are continuing to hunt them. the way it looks right now, is it appropriate to say that we're going to be in Iraq for the long haul, the same way we have been in Germany or Italy or Japan for that matter? And certainly Germany, our presence in Germany today looks a lot different than it did in 1946. But, I guess that's a double-edged question there. Are we going to be there that long, do you think, from your point of view? And can we ever get to a place where it is like, a tour in Iraq is like a tour in Germany?
So that's such an interesting question. Iraq is so strategically positioned. There's a lot of people that aren't the United States of America who are very interested in a stable and Western influence, if not controlled, Iraq. So especially Saudi Arabia, the Israelis. There's all types of Kuwait, of course, doesn't want to get stomped out again. There's all kind of regional powers and interests that want Iraq to be stable, but not too independent. There is, as you know, there's a Shia majority there. That's the religious sect of Islam that's predominant in Iran as well. And there's a lot of back and forth between Iran and in Iraq on the religious front and the cultural front and the hating the United States front. I remember Muqtada al-Sadr kept going back into Iran to study and comb and all this other stuff. There's constant flow. The EFPs that we alluded to earlier were flowing in that expertise from Iran as well.
There is a literal memorial to General Soleimani from Iran that we killed, that we took out in a strike in Iraq, who's responsible for a lot of the terror throughout the region. There's a literal memorial to him in the road into Baghdad International Airport that's all lit up and everything. The last time I was in Iraq, year or two ago, I couldn't believe my eyes that they were actually memorializing the spot where he was blown up.
I didn't know that, but that doesn't surprise me. The Shia influence, Iranian influence is so strong there. It's actually surprising to me that we do still have such a big influence there. As you know, you remember, because we lived through it, we got asked to leave, and we did, and the country fell apart, so they let us come back in. So I think strategically that it's really smart for us to have some type of enduring presence there. And I think that it will probably forever, or at least for the foreseeable future, look more like what we're kind of doing with Korea right now, where you rotate units in rather than send families a la Japan or Germany. I think that makes sense. It's a good way to do it. In fact, one of the West Point graduates that my wife and I sponsored for all 4 years while she was here was a helicopter and pilot in Iraq not too long ago. And it just kind of blew my mind that we're still doing that over there. But there's so much power projection capability by occupying that piece of ground. You have easy flight into Lebanon. Well, with Syria, you got Lebanon, you're right there in Iraq, you're a threat to Iran. There's all kind of things that you can do by holding on to that territory. Of course, Iraq has so much oil as well, which we care about as America. And it also has the Kurds, which is a huge thorny issue with Turkey and Iran and Iraq. So there's a lot of smartness in having a force there as long as it continues to be protected. And I haven't heard a lot about a whole bunch of attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq since the kerfuffle with Iran happened, certainly. So it's been very interesting to me. It seems like people want to keep it kind of at a low simmer than let it boil over. So long answer to your question, yeah, I think we're going to be there for a while, and I think it's probably a smart idea.
Yeah, I feel very torn on the issue. I could argue it both ways, but it is something that I think it's going to continue to be a somewhat high threat tour for people as long as the Ayatollah is in charge of Iran. It's not so much about is Iraq dangerous or not, so as long as Iran continues to be dangerous and undermine the spirit of what's going on in Iraq or what could go on in Iraq, it's going to continue to be a dangerous tour for U.S. service members. Let's bring it a little bit closer to home here. Yeah. We're looking at, some sort of let's just call it an escalation of hostilities between us and Venezuela specifically right now. Venezuela, the real quick primer on Venezuela is it's been a shit show for a while now. The guy in charge down there is a dictator. A lot of Venezuelans don't like him, especially Venezuelans that have come to America and escaped his kind of reign of terror. He's definitely put a bunch of thugs and cartel members and Russians and Chinese people into places of power down there and just turned it into a mess. It is also one of the largest oil suppliers in the world outside of the Arab states, the Gulf states. So it's complicated. It's real close to home for us. We seized a oil tanker the other day. We've been blowing up boats in the water, in international waters between here and there. One could argue it's already a shooting war because of those things, but I think when I say it, will it turn into a shooting war, or how do we avoid a shooting war? I mean, sort of boots on the ground. Let's call it, infantrymen that are parachuting in and engaging with Venezuelan forces, right? Like, as an intel professional, what are the levers that you're pulling to where we can still achieve our desired strategic outcomes without engaging in very open hostilities and a hot shooting war?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch this unfold. Of course, I'm not involved in any kind of national decision making, but I am very interested in it. I'll tell you what I'd like to see. So I'd like to see Maduro out of power. I'd like to see a democratic form of government reinstituted in Venezuela. I would like to see them stop supporting Hezbollah, Iran, Russia, etc. I'd like to see all that. What I think we're doing with these escalations is we're sending messages. We're sending messages by blowing up the drug boats. We're sending messages by seizing oil tankers that you're not going to have that type of impunity in our backyard anymore. The new National Security Strategy, NSS, came out, and I'm still working my way through that, but it seems like it's being likened to a new Monroe Doctrine, meaning, hey, this is our area of influence. All you clowns need to stay out of it. So what I think we're doing with all these escalations, which include economic sanctions, it includes diplomatic isolation, the whole dime construct, the whole gamut of it. What we're doing is we're ratcheting up the pressure, I think, in order to let the Venezuelan people have the right conditions, let it get bad enough to where they'll seize control of their government. And you mentioned that Maduro's a dictator. He lost the last election. Everybody knows he lost, but he held on to power anyway. So he is desperate to stay in power. His regime, his junta is desperate to stay in control. So they're making all kind of desperate deals with unsavory characters. And I think we're going to see this type of thing keep going. Last I heard, we sent a carrier strike force down there, which is a huge message and a very capable platform. So I hope it doesn't devolve into anything kinetic, but it seems like we're putting the pieces in place to have a successful outcome for us if we need to.
Yeah, if push comes to shove, right? We'll be ready to shove, is what it looks like. Yeah, like you said, a carrier strike group down there, and I think that comes with a full MEU of Marines and all of that, the whole kit and caboodle. They're not messing around. I personally hope we avoid, again, another open war. I don't want to be involved in another nation building project, but, we've both lived through insurgent warfare in the Middle East and the effects of that. As we see these escalations happening and just escalations against the cartels in general, like cartels are now designated as foreign terrorist organizations. At least most of the major ones are. People should know that there's many different cartels. There's not just the cartel. It's a bunch of different cartels. I believe most, if not all of them, are designated as FTOs or foreign terrorist organizations at this point. Which what that actually means, and you could probably explain this more, but what that actually means is the types of things that we can do to counter them, the legal authorities that are given to things like the military and intelligence community is significantly greater and more open. But as we look at the things that we're doing to, again, go after those organizations, and I'm all for it because I think they are evil organizations and they don't do any good or in the world. What are the chances that some of these similar tactics that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan are going to be employed within the United States if the war against these cartels continues to escalate? And is there anything Americans should be looking out for as this happens?
There's so much in the world that makes America targetable right now. I think it's always smart to be prudent. on it. I think I read an article just before I came in today that said there recently a shooting in Australia, terrorist related shooting. So Americans need to be vigilant always, and it's not just the stereotypical threat of what people have in their mind when they think of a terrorist. They're not always from the Middle East. They're not always what you have in your head. They're not always men. So we got to maintain that say something attitude. In terms of what the cartel's reaction is going to be, I think to some degree they're going to see a lot of what's happening right now as the price of doing business. So yeah, we're losing some boats, we're losing some of our members. I don't know. I have no idea. I have no way of knowing how much of an impact this is actually happening on the cartels that are being targeted. Now, there are things that they can do. Obviously, there are millions of people who are living illegally in the United States right now, and some of them are probably bad people. So some of those people who are here who are bad people can do things to us. But also, I think that the cartels, to use the slang term that the young people use now, they don't want that smoke. They don't want to really give people a reason. The drug boat interdictions has been really controversial in the United States. But if there was some type of major terrorist attack in the United States that killed Americans that could be traced back to them, that's a lot of legitimization. So I suspect the cartels are going to try to maintain a low profile, find alternate ways to get what they need done that don't involve provoking a major reaction from the United States. Venezuela is probably likely going to do the same thing right now, just try to stir up international support for them to try to get America to back down. It'll be interesting to see how it works out.
They don't want to give us a Gulf of Tonkin incident for free.
Yes.
They don't want to. They're not trying to give us a Franz Ferdinand assassination, right?
Or remember the main moment, a little closer to that area. Yeah.
No, that actually makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective before, and makes me feel a little bit better about the situation. I just hate the idea as a father with young girls growing up in the world, same as you. Hate the idea of IEDs being on our roads and things like that, and the enemy always has a vote, and I'm very acutely aware of that. From an intel perspective, though, and again, we've already talked about what young intel professionals are facing out there in the world today. When it comes to going after cartel operatives, how much do you think that's the same as going after terrorist organizations in the Middle East? Can you use a lot of the same playbook, or do you think there's a whole new playbook that needs to be used?
So the conditions change, but I don't think the tactics and the strategy need to. F3AD is going to work against drug lords just as well as it worked against ISIS and Al Qaeda. In fact, as you know, we did do some drug interdicting over in Afghanistan. I would like that to have been more successful, but that did take place. So I think you apply the same things. It's just a different target, and right now those targets aren't shooting back. So I think this is probably a good practice in a lot of ways to hone the next generation of warfighters on the types of processes and systems that they need in order to be successful. So if we start seeing things happen in the homeland, then that's going to require a little bit of refocus, because nothing's more important than protecting that. But I think those skills are directly transferable, and just getting the reps in that type of environment is going to be extremely helpful. If something like LSCO, large-scale combat operations, kick off, at least you'll have those reps, you understand the systems, you have your team already in place. I think it'll be helpful in the long run.
Yeah. It's the world's changing, and I am curious to see how things play out. It's every day seems to be something new, and I'll be curious to see what is carried over from our wars into the next one, wherever that may be. There certainly will be another one. I don't think we've seen our last war, unfortunately. No. Let's talk a little bit about leadership. Okay. And you've been in leadership positions for most of your career as an officer, and even as a civilian, and leading organizations at West Point, as well as running the amazing site, the Havok Journal, and you've got a lot of experience. And I think the Havok Journal is actually a great look at how important leadership can be, because those are all unpaid contributors. And
Right.
it's it's a leadership challenge of how do you attract that kind of talent and get that stuff, but not pay for it. Not that that's a goal. I think that was always a goal to be able to pay people for their submissions. But
That's right.
man, the digital media space is tough these days, and it has been. But that is a testament to your leadership and the types of things that you do. And I'm sure some of those lessons learned from your time in the military. You've specifically written before about broken windows leadership. And I'm just wondering, can you kind of break down what that is and how people might be able to apply that in their own jobs?
For sure. So broken windows leadership is, of course, based on broken windows policing. And that's something that emerged in the 1980s. I think it was Ellison and Kelly. I'm getting their names wrong, but in the 1980s, there was an article written about it, like a whole study on it, and it was adopted in a number of jurisdictions, including New York City, which is basically you don't overlook any standards.
Mm-hmm.
So the broken windows analogy is if there is an abandoned building on the street that you patrol and there's broken windows in it, you get the windows fixed and you punish the perpetrators, even though that's a really low level crime. That's petty crime. That's probably juveniles. So you attack crime wherever you see it. And that prevents little things from becoming big things. And often if you bust someone for something little, you find out they're doing something big. It's like a traffic stop. You pull him over because his taillight's out and you find out he's got 5 kilos of cocaine in the back. So I wrote an article. I'm sure I'm not the first one to come up with this idea about applying that to leadership as well, about not walking past standards. And one of the things that made me think through this, when I headed up the officership capstone here at West Point MX 400, we studied a book called Black Hearts, which is a nonfiction book that's a story of a group of soldiers in the 101st, which we mentioned I served in. I wasn't in this unit, but I was in the 101st, who committed a heinous war crime that involved the rape and murder of a 14-year-old Iraqi girl and her family. This thing happened. And when you start looking at it and unpacking it, you see how a series of leadership failures and overlooking small standards snowballs over time into this thankfully very limited extreme of the series of felonies that I described to you earlier. These individuals they were in combat. It was tough, but they would regularly break small rules. They wouldn't shave. They left their boots and blouse. They wouldn't tuck in their laces. These are small. These are petty things that many leaders are tempted to overlook. But when you start ignoring rules, the soldiers will start picking and choosing the ones they want to follow. This is true in the Army, is true in the business world, et cetera. So my attitude for decades has been, we're not going to have rules we don't enforce. If it's a dumb rule, then we won't do it. And if we do decide that we need to break a rule, because sometimes you have to do that, then it's going to be a deliberate decision made by the commander. For example, if we're out of water, then I'm going to authorize people not shaving. But you're not going to make that decision on your own. So if you think you need to make that decision, you come talk to me. We work it out. I'm a very reasonable guy, but you don't let people pick and choose the rules they're going to follow. Also, you have to have officers and NCOs involved in soldiers all the time. And I don't mean micromanaging. I don't mean getting in all their business, but they have to be present. They have to be leading. And one of the lessons of Black Hearts, to me, one of the most powerful lessons is what happens when officers don't do their jobs, when they're not that moral compass, when they're not there with the NCOs, they're not leading from the front. And sometimes that happens because you got distance between them. Sometimes it happens because those leaders get killed. But sometimes it happens because leaders don't have the intestinal fortitude to take that dangerous trip out to the outpost, to hold soldiers to standard, to live that standard themselves. So I'm a believer in that type of broken windows policing, that broken windows leadership of, hey, everything we do is important. You enforce all the rules. You have rules that make sense. If a rule's stupid, then we do away with it. We don't just ignore it. So that was the premise of that broken windows leadership. And I think it's a good idea, especially for junior leaders who are not so sure of themselves. You can't walk past standards being broken. If you walk past something that's happening, you've established a new standard, a new lower standard. And in extreme cases, that could end up like Black Hearts.
Yeah, Black Hearts is an interesting case study. It's a book that I highly recommend people read. One of the big, I think, underlying themes of that is moral courage and the lack of it
Yeah.
in many situations, doing the unpopular right thing over the easy wrong thing. It's very, very interesting and a very tragic story, and I don't think it's representative of all service members or anything like that, but it is an example of how bad and wrong things can go in a war zone with bad leadership. Many people these days, though, they complain about their leadership, both from, their corporate managers to political leaders, leaders at all levels. People always complain about their leaders, right? But I think it's especially poignant today for a variety of reasons at all levels of American society. And I think that there's a lot of moral cowards out there, and they're in leadership positions. When you think about examples of moral courage, though, the great examples, I'm sure you've seen it multiple times over your career, stuff that you've personally witnessed. Is there any sort of vignette or person that sticks out?
Yeah. So many different examples, and courage manifests itself in different ways. I actually think physical courage is easier than moral courage. Many times, physical courage, you don't have time to think through the consequences. You just got to do it. So I remember one example when I was in the infantry, when I was in the 101st, that really stands out to me to this day. First thing that popped in my head when you asked the question, Marty. So in the battle days of the 90s, most of your listeners probably weren't in the military then, but those of us who were in, especially in the conventional forces back then, will remember that we were short on everything. I remember we rationed toilet paper in the barracks. We rationed printer paper in the one copier that we had in the battalion, which was at the battalion headquarters. We didn't have money to go to fuel the tanks, the vehicles to go to the field, etc. We had problems. Okay, we had problems back then. But I remember that I had gone from being a platoon leader. I was a platoon leader for a long time in Delta Company 1st 327. That was a heavy weapons platoon, 5th platoon. And I got promoted, again, air quotes, because I didn't think it was promotion, to being the battalion S1 for 1st Battalion, because I was a smart guy and pretty organized. That was a terrible position to put me in because that's a captain's position. So I was a non-ranger qualified infantry officer in a lieutenant in a captain's position on staff. It was a bad position to be in. But I remember that I was involved in the personnel moves. I was dealing with the Brigade S1 in it. And I remember that the Brigade S1 assistant, who was another guy, a guy I knew, came to me and said, "Hey, we want to transfer this guy to your unit because your unit's going to be, I think we're going to be yellow on personnel on the unit status report," which is bad. We were going to be yellow or red, whatever it was. He didn't want that. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to transfer this guy to you, and this pay grade, you won't be red for your unit status report." I was like, "That's great." But then he said that he only wanted to do it for a day. So on this day, he was going to transfer this guy to me, and then the next day he was going to take it back. And I told him that was ridiculous. Like, no, that's not how this works. You want to give me that guy, then we're legitimately not red, and I'll keep him. But the shell game that you're pulling, because he was going to transfer to another battalion the next day, so they would be green as well. This is how things don't get fixed. If we don't ever acknowledge there's a problem, why would anyone ever give us a fix? And he said, "I'm going to go tell the brigade commander that you're being uncooperative, all this other stuff." And I was like, "Okay, you do what you need to do." So I went to my battalion commander. I was like, "Hey, sir, here's the situation. The brigade commander might be calling you." And I wasn't sure I was going to react to it because there would be a lot of pressure on him to not be the only battalion in the 101st Airborne Division who wasn't good on USR because I wouldn't play ball. And to his enormous credit, he had the same reaction I did. "That's stupid. We're not doing that. Tell that assistant brigade S1 to call me." And that's where it ended. And later, that same battalion commander ended up testifying before Congress about readiness. And I always had respect for that guy. His replacement was a dirtbag, and the reason that I tried to quit the Army the first time. But this guy was a great leader and set a good example on that. And a lot of people say, "Oh, that's such an easy thing. I would do the same thing. Anyone would do the same thing." No, you wouldn't. No, they don't. And anyone who doubts me on that can look up a paper called "Lying to Ourselves." It's by Leonard Wong. I recommend every professional military read it. I resisted reading it because I only knew about it before I read it. I was compelled to read it by my boss here at West Point because he wanted to put it in MX 400, which we did. Because I interpret it as just another hit piece on the Army by somebody who doesn't know us. This is some egghead academic. But then when I read it, I found out that the guy who wrote it was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And when I was reading about it, it was about all the things that we say that we do, that we don't do in the Army, and all the things we lie about having done. And I read it, Marty, and to my shame, I was like, I've done that. I've seen that. I've had that happen to me. Because until relatively recently, there were more training hours that you were required to do for annual training than you had training time available. Like if you were legit doing it. So guys would do what we call pencil whipping. You get the smartest private in your squad, and he takes the online mandatory EO class or whatever it is for the entire squad. There was so much of that happening out there. So Leonard Wong's article about lying to ourselves is a great example of how to do that. So everyone thinks that they're going to be these great moral exemplars until they're put in that position. Do you want to be the person that's making everybody train late on a Friday? Do you want to be the company commander who's the only one in the entire brigade whose tracks aren't 100% good because everyone else is pencil whipping the maintenance, but you're making it being done to standard? So it's hard to do. And I think we need to be more protective of people who demonstrate moral courage, and especially senior leaders need to show more of that. And I think that's a problem, not only in the military, but in politics, in the clergy and business.
Couldn't agree more. And it's the reason I bring it up. You know, I've been faced with my own moral quandaries over the years. I think most people have. And maybe some decisions you're proud of, some maybe you wish you could do it over again, you know, depending on the situation. But it's definitely something I think people should think about more, is moral courage. And it applies to everybody every day, doing the hard right over the easy wrong. It's easier said than done. Like you said, physical courage is easier. Saying in retrospect, oh, I would have done the right thing. My friend Jack Mandeville, who's also been on the show, he's a former Marine. Now he's a comedian, entertainer, historian. He runs a channel called Jacked History. And he had a video out the other day talking about a amazing woman who was a doctor and one of the first Medal of Honor recipients in the Civil War, Mary Walker, I think was her name, and talked about some of the things that she was doing at that time, and that was seen as good, and you know, just like almost like common sense today. And he brought up, he's like, and if you're one of those people saying that you would have done the same thing back then, shut up. Fuck you. No, you wouldn't have. You would have been a part of the other 99.9% of people, just like you are today, that would have went along with societal norms. You know, lots of people have all sorts of moral courage in retrospect. It's easy to say you're against slavery today. Yep. It's easy to say that you are against this or that after the fact, when it's normal to have that opinion. It's totally different when it's something that's more contemporary and people, you know, maybe their livelihood's at stake or their paycheck or the next promotion or something like that. It's that, you know, maybe it's the difference between their kid making the varsity team or not. There's all sorts of moral quandaries that people run into. And I think it's an interesting thing, and I think about it often myself. You know, I just want to sum this all up. You know, you've got 27 years in the military. You're still there at West Point doing great work. You've got 7 tours in combat. Is there any leadership lesson that you wish you would have learned earlier that would have maybe saved some heartache for you or somebody else?
Yeah, so many, Marty. So I commanded at the company level 4 times, once in 2nd Infantry Division, twice in 5th Group, and then again in JSOC. I think if I were to go back right now, I would be a really good company commander. Now, there's a lot of time in between. Company commander is kind of low-level leadership position, and I retired as an 05. But I think I'd be really good at that because I kind of learned empathy over the years. And the word empathy has gotten a bad shake lately, in my opinion. But you got to understand how what you're doing affects people. And there's a lengthy story about involving a soldier of mine that we probably don't have time to tell today that really brought home to me the importance of being kind as a leader, because it costs me nothing to be kind. If I'm a strong, confident leader, it doesn't mean you're weak. but you can do things in a way that that's not a jerk. And I think, especially for young men, and certainly for me personally, I didn't understand that when I was young. I thought being in the Army was all about being just basically being as brutal as you could. That's not an effective way to lead. And it's not because this generation's soft. No, when I think about the way that I led, the type of leader that got the most out of me, the type of leader that I want to be, that I think works best, is something who's got that empathy, who can take care of people while getting the job done. So if I were to go back now, knowing what I know now after 27 years in the Army and 53 years of living, I'd spend more time caring about people and demonstrating that I cared. I think I always cared, but I didn't do a good way of showing it, and I didn't care about people in the way that they needed to be cared for. Certainly going from the infantry, the 101st, to MI in 2ID, back when I was in the infantry, we didn't have any women. There were none. You'd have some at brigade, but you didn't have any in your unit. And then when I got to 2nd Infantry Division with all those linguists, a large portion were women. 5 of my platoon leaders when I was company commander were female. I had 2 male platoon leaders, 5 females. They're different. Being in intel is different. Different stages of life are different. You have to treat people differently to get the most out of them. Doesn't mean you treat some better, but you treat them differently, finding what works for them. And I think that empathy piece is something that's often overlooked. So if I went back and wanted to improve my leadership ability, I would have gotten to that point sooner.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of a great way. I mean, this episode comes out a day or two before Christmas, and, a little bit of kindness, a little bit of empathy.
Nice.
I think it's right in line with the season, and a little more of that going around is never a bad thing. I mean, there's definitely utility in when it's time to be hard, as somebody that's, always trying to find the line of the best way to raise little kids and things like that. It's like you try to be empathetic and kind 90% of the time, but sometimes 10% you got to be a little bit more stern and get the point across, and it's always a balancing act. But, I think empathy and kindness in almost any interaction in life should always be the first reaction, not the last, and if you have to get angry for whatever reason, that can come as a escalation of force, right? But with all that said, Charlie, man, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I genuinely, you, Lila, and the whole family, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, a good New Year, all of that sort of stuff. And I say it every time we talk, but I need to get down to West Point and say hi in person again sometime soon.
Would love to have you, Marty. Thanks for so much for having me on the show, and I look forward to our next collab and your next book. Thank you so much, brother.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. All right. And one last thing to everybody listening. I hope you have a Merry Christmas too, a Happy Holiday, whatever you're celebrating this time of year. I hope it's a good one. And we'll see you in 2026.